I wanted to share some personal experiences that coincided with stuff you were saying right before the break about kind of ripping, sort of the experience ripping you wide open, kind of.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of experiences in my life that kind of come from abandonment and feeling unloved. Mm-hmm. And so as a consequence, most of my life has been focused in on trying to organize my life and orchestrate things so that I have this sense of control. Mm-hmm. And I've actually done a pretty good job of that. And recently, I succeeded in kind of screwing that up. Mm-hmm. And I came about a month ago. John Aston has been telling me about you for quite a while, and it just worked out that somehow I could come to when you were in Santa Cruz about a month ago. Mm-hmm. This is kind of right in the middle of sort of kind of assessing these experiences. And then that night, I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and I had one of those moments of clarity, mm-hmm. which is that all of these things that had happened to me were like preordained, outside of my control. I had no control over them. And for a guy who's tried to control everything in his life, all his life, I just had to laugh.
Yeah.
And then as I have reflected on that today and yesterday and over the last month, it is, and I think about the issue of control and not control. Do we have control? Don't we have control? And I've always kind of had this illusion that I was controlling things. And the more successful I've been, and the older I've gotten, the more I realize I have less and less control over anything.
Yeah.
And then to reach this point where it's like I had, and the interesting thing about the experience was, I had, it's like that moment of clarity. I could see things that had happened, words that had come out of my mouth, things that other people had said that even went back, to when I was 5 years old. Mm-hmm. Sort of it all led up, and I felt like I was the victim of this cruel joke that nature or the divine was playing on me, mm-hmm. taking my own fears and desires and manipulating me into basically sort of shattering my image of myself. And the whole thing just struck me as unbelievably funny. Yes. And my sort of question is, when you take that, and then you take that in the context of the idea of oneness and no separate self, mm-hmm. it is, well, if there's really no separate self, then really I've done that to myself. And mm-hmm. and I guess it's that that transcendent self or unborn self or whatever you want to call it has essentially been sort of like a marionette guiding or manipulating that image self, the one that creates the pictures, mm-hmm. in leading it into this thing to where it's like, hey, slapping myself in the face, wake up.
Yeah. Pretty much. Okay. Yeah. That's why, this whole spiritual thing about the spiritual life, reality itself, reality's playing hardball, right? It's not playing spirituality. It's not playing incense and candles, right? It's playing wake up at any cost, and it's called your life and my life, as good or bad as it's been. That's the game reality's playing. It's like, it is a force of nature. And a force of nature, its only concern really is to evolve and move on. And spirit, its only concern is to wake up. That's what it's all about. Just like nature isn't particularly nice and pretty about evolving, is it? It's not this. It's not that.
The real evolution isn't.
No.
The real steps
the real thing
are painful.
Yeah, and spirituality, or the spirit evolving to the consciousness of itself, it's the same thing. It's ironic that when the veil opens a little bit and one sees that, is when one really sees it. It's sort of quite humorous. You would think it would be shocking and horrendous, but it actually turns out to often be quite humorous. Most people have themselves a really good laugh over it.
Yeah, it's a very, very funny practical joke that it's playing on you.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the experiences are one it's unbelievably liberating for a guy who's trying to try to control everything all his life to realize he has no control.
He doesn't have it. Yes.
But in a sense, there's this control that some higher force within, or that reality, that true reality and awakening within, is kind of quietly, maybe quietly nudging, but more often than not, it's not nudging, it's getting out the 2x4 and smacking you up the side of the head.
Pretty much. Yeah. And it's amazing how determined we can be to stay asleep for so long.
First there's a nudge, then there's a push, then there's a shove, then there's a sock, and then there's...
Right.
And then you get hit by, you get in 3 car accidents in 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And run over an old lady.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Okay.
As I said, it doesn't have to be this way by any means, but it just usually is most people come to awakening through difficulty. It's, for most people, it's not this like lily white halo enshrouded thing. That's for the people who don't want to awaken. That's usually the avoidance of awakening. In truth, it's, as I like to say, it's more of a little bit of a bloody mess. We don't wake up from our own, what we do right. We wake up in spite of ourselves, for the most part.
And yet there seems to be, I guess it's talking earlier about sort of this force,
yes,
or this longing, which was just discussed, which is that force for awakening seems to be underlying at the core of everything.
Everything.
And there's a tremendous sense of comfort, I guess, in that, because it's sort of like if you kind of just let it go and let it happen, it can be pleasant, but more often than not, it's painful.
When you're not letting it happen, as soon as you let it happen, it doesn't have to go through a process anymore.
That's a lovely thought.
Yeah, it's the process. As soon as total letting it happen happens, then there's no process to it. Then any more than there's a process to waking up from a dream at night. We're only halfway awake from a dream. Groggy. You ever been groggy? Have one of those dreams in the morning, and you're kind of awake, and you're going in and out, and you're kind of lucid. You kind of know you're dreaming, but it's a pleasant dream, or maybe it's not even pleasant, but just intriguing. So you want to know how it concludes. So you keep trying to go to sleep, and then you keep waking up. So
I had the exact same experience you were describing earlier about the dream, and just now describing in the last couple of weeks of, it was a dream, and I wanted to, see what was going to happen.
Yes.
And so I kept going back to get there.
Yes. But when spontaneously, because remember, you don't really have control, but when spontaneously all of you is aligned, which means nothing in you does not want to be awake, then there's nothing to hold you in the dream state, is there?
Mm-mm.
There's nothing at all there. Whatever that takes, it just might take just the right day. It might take the sound of a bird. It might take a difficult situation. It might take the smallest thing. Might take the biggest thing.
It all seems too easy in a way.
It's ridiculously easy. That's the rub. The rub is here we are struggling in all these years and years and years and years and years. And then it's also sort of not necessary. The struggle, if it does anything, it sort of slows everything down. You know? The only thing that's for sure is everything is totally awakened. It's the direction the whole universe is going, and you can't stop it. And yet, strangely, everybody's worried that somehow it's going to go wrong.
Thank you.
Enjoy yourself. It's easier to sort of sit back a bit in it's like being in a car when you realize there is another force that can steer the car. It's a little bit easier to take your hands off the wheel, isn't it? And you realize through experience, your life doesn't fall apart necessarily. It might look like it's falling apart at certain times, but overall it's actually falling together. It falls into place. And there's something smarter than this little gray matter between our two ears, you know. And it can do a much better job at steering this whole thing than we can. Yes.